Well, this one should be fun. It goes without saying, but here we have to say it. Things that only happen so often, they're still utterly predictable. I want to use the example of the floods in the southeast to illustrate this. It's a nice, succinct principle, or example, rather. These are actual tweets I pulled off the internet. One lady says, "People who keep saying that Appalachia should have been prepared for this really know nothing about the area or weather. This wasn't a once-in-a-lifetime thing. This was a thing has never happened since Noah kind of thing. It's one thing to live below sea level and have this happen. It's a whole other to literally live in the mountains and have your home wash away or have water covering your house. People had less than a day's warning of how bad it might be, and nothing said it would be this bad. On the coast, people know a week ahead what will likely happen because it happens all the time. It's not the same." And this person named John, who is so secure in himself, will assume that he's wearing a mask in his profile picture. That's how safe he needs to be from COVID. He says, "Need people to understand that for people in Appalachia, this wasn't improbable. It was unimaginable. It was unthinkable. It's so unthinkable, I can't even capitalize the first letter of my sentences." Look, let's just list off the excuses this lady machine guns out, okay? First off, she says people who don't know, who says they should have been prepared, people who say they should have been prepared know nothing about the area or weather. Let me tell you something. It rains all the time in eastern Tennessee, in the mountains, in the Carolinas. It rains all the time. If you live in the mountains, there are rivers everywhere that carry out this water. And you've seen them. If you live in that area, if you've driven through that area, you've seen them. If you live anywhere near a river, guess what? The only thing protecting you from said river is the distance, the height between you and that river. So if there are things that can cause that river to rise, you better be sure that it's not going to rise high enough to hit your house or the highway. And guess what? When you drive through these places, guess where the roads are? Guess where the homes are? They're right next to the water. She continues that this has never happened before. How could anyone expect it? The river rises all the time. The only question is the maximum height of the river. But you can rest for sure that it has risen that high before. It just didn't happen yesterday or the week before or the year before. It happens. I used to live in Maryland, and there's a little town called Ellicott City that, I've been to a billion times. And the historic town of Ellicott City, it's in a crevice of a mountain, and there's a river going through. Now, in old-timey times, they had to build cities around these rivers because they used them for a mill. And that was sort of the center of industry. You couldn't compete with that because if you have to grind grain by hand, it's just a total nightmare. Well, guess what? It's not a modern little town. It's just a historic center with some lame shops because everyone knows the place floods. No one's going to set up a big business there. It's been flooding since people have been there forever. It only happens once every many years, but it's well known that that place floods every once in a while. And yet it made the news years ago. It flooded really badly. It wiped out a bunch of the buildings. Well, those are old buildings, but people know it floods. It's just a question of how much. But what this lady's saying is, if something doesn't happen every single day, we can't be held accountable for it. How insane is that? She says on the coast, yeah, hurricanes are a known problem, but not inland. Well, pretty much every hurricane goes inland. If you live on the East Coast, you know this. They always cause storms. They deteriorate a little bit, and then they dump tons of rain. And she's saying, well, we can only be held accountable for consequences that happen all the time. You can't blame people for this. And we only knew a day ahead of time. And no one told us it would be this bad. Why is it someone else's job to do that? My goodness, people. Guess what? If you live near a river, You live in a flood zone, period. Point blank, we're done. If you live in the woods, you live in a forest fire area. Doesn't matter if it's never burned down before during your lifetime even, let alone last week. You know, if your house gets burned down in a forest fire, you don't say, well, geez, this has never happened to me. This didn't happen yesterday. How could I have known that having solid trees right up to my house is a bad idea in an area that has forest fires all the time? But my house has never burned down before. How is it my fault? Now, here's a bunch of takes from based people who actually have a brain. This person says the track clearly had all that moisture heading into that area. TCs dump all their water well inland. People had time. In other words, what did you think was going to happen? The question was where it was going. But the places that got flooded were absolutely potential places for it to go. I'll read the last comment next and the middle one after that. The last comment says, water seeking its own level, which is an awesome pun. Don't build on certain topographical map features or pay the price. I'll explain the pun for those who don't get it. Water does seek its own level, and this was a situation where there was flooding because a bunch of water got dumped at elevation and it flows downward. But it's also an example of Darwin in effect because dumb people do dumb things. Surprise! They don't see things coming. And they really feel like, on the one hand, they have a total view of everything that could happen. And on the other, when the consequences for their stupidity rolls in, they blame other people, like that lady did. No one told us. How could we have known? They didn't tell us exactly what was going to happen. Well, can you predict the future or can't you? Because if you're not confident enough in your predictions of the future to prepare for things and then carry the consequences of the choices you made, then you shouldn't live as if you're independent, because you're not. Right? Middle person says, I bet all the morons who make fun of preppers are really kicking themselves in the butt right now. All Americans better learn today how to be preppers or you'll be dead in the next 5 years. If you think things are bad now, they're going to get 100 times worse. So adjusting slightly for the hyperbole, in essence, what this guy's saying has merit. You can't just say things are okay now, they're going to be okay tomorrow. This is the ant and the grasshopper, people. You should have learned this in elementary school. I don't know what public schools are teaching today. It's more like the rainbow and the whatever. Okay, so here's the normal responses. This is what you're going to get from normal people. Now, what I want you to do is analyze this a bit and take it up to the next level and ask what their motives are and what they're really saying at a principle level, okay? Let's start to the right here. This lady says, I can't believe people are this awful to actually blame people living in the mountains for not being prepared for a hurricane. Hurricanes hit the entire East Coast, very well inland. Like I said, if you live in that area, you have been hit by many hurricanes many times. You know that it entails a lot of rain and wind. It's not a surprise. You know this. Okay? Now let's go to, so that's completely ridiculous to say. Let's go to the rest of her comment. I can't believe people are this awful to actually blame. Okay? What motives is she assuming from people like the ones whose comments we just read? Do you really think these people are sitting there thinking, how can I be awful to these folks? What can I say to make them feel bad? No. They're stating the truth for the benefit of people that can learn for the future. That's their motive. The point is, in the future, people shouldn't assume that because they haven't been hit in a hurricane in the last 30 seconds, they're going to be safe. People shouldn't assume that building a house in a floodplain or on the sides of a crevice of a mountain where a river runs through it already is a safe place to build a house. If you were dumb enough to do that before, now the second wave of an intelligence test is upon you. And the question is, are you going to learn from the mistake? Or in this case, the mistakes of others. So a bunch of people have now suffered because their house floated away or the cars or something, and they have the opportunity to learn, but they don't have a choice because it was on them. They don't have to learn, but they had to experience it. These people, these based people who are calling the facts, are helping everyone else who didn't suffer yet avoid that suffering. This is the epitome of charity. It's not cruel. It's not blaming people. I mean, it is their fault. It's not something bad to do. It's calling the truth. Now let's read these other ridiculous takes. It's a coping mechanism. The idea that this could happen to them is absolutely terrifying, so they tell themselves they would have done something differently so they can sleep better at night. Do you really think these three people, I'm pretty sure they're all dudes, just judging by the profile pictures, do you really think that these three dudes would do something other than what they're saying they would do? I don't think so. I don't think so. Now, there certainly are many coping mechanisms, and people do really dumb things to feel better about themselves, but I'm not sure those guys really care about what this person is saying they care about. This is not a bad take. This one is. People are cruel. They are entitled, and they need to feel right, even when they are so clearly wrong. I'm so sorry. This is devastating. Prayers for Appalachia. Prayers for Appalachia as I live my life the same way, doing stupid things when I know better. Do you know what this guy's motive is? This guy's motive is he knows he does similarly stupid things in his life. And if he doesn't let off this sacrament, this religious sacrament of pretending to be sad about these people, which, by the way, he will do nothing. He won't donate money. He's not going to grab his chainsaw and get in his truck. He probably doesn't have a chainsaw because he's clearly beta. He's not going to help anybody. He's going to say prayers for Appalachia. He's not even actually going to pray. I believe this person is actually going to pray. Okay, but not this person. But prayers only go so far. Chainsaws can go farther. Sometimes chainsaws are the answer to prayer. And so sometimes they should be the offer of prayer as well. Okay, don't ask God to do something you're not willing to do for yourself. Ask him to intervene when it's beyond your ability. Very few things are like that, okay? Prayers are precious. Don't waste them. Get a chainsaw instead, okay? Now this person, who also looks like a beta male, I'm not blaming the people. I'm blaming, I have to say it in the way this guy's, I'm not blaming the people. I'm blaming the Republican leadership that calls them basement dwellers behind closed doors. And then he starts going, conspiracy. They knew. Countless scientists have been warning them for decades, right? Yes, this is global warming. The actual scientists will tell you that this is driven by the sun, not cow farts, okay? So, there we have it. This is how normal people react. Now, let me just take this further. You look at the scriptures, you can see this, that different people react in different ways to the same information. And now all of a sudden, hopefully you can apply those scriptures to the modern world and see how it is that so many people could see so many miracles done by Jesus or his disciples throughout time, not just the ones that lived in his time, and just turn up their noses at them and say crazy things instead of believing. And that's why increasingly miracles have to be floods and not the cessation of famines or droughts, which cause famines. You know, he has to send floods instead of sending rain for food. He sends floods to wipe away your houses. This is why. This is why it has to be that way. This is why we can't have nice things, because of people like Ruben Safaya and Max KO and Audra with her fake empathy. Okay? If you really cared about people and the maximum benefit, you'd be saying things like this. Hey, people shouldn't live in dumb places. Why don't you move? We should all take a lesson from this and move. And we should all get our chainsaws and go clear the debris. Right? This is fake empathy. What are some takeaways? Different people react to the same information in different ways. Get used to it and learn to live that way. When bad things happen, here are the options. You can admit that it was possible to predict, because it almost always is. But it requires honesty. Most people refuse to see what's true because it would implicate themselves. This especially applies with matters that seem to be concerning other people. So you get these overt virtue signaling emissions of fake empathy that are really just a sacrament to keep your own guilt at bay for being a horrible person yourself. You could extract the patterns and apply it to other situations. Let's say that this is a surprise to you, okay? So the thing to do is to extract the principles and apply it to other situations in your life. Like maybe you don't live right next door to a river, but maybe you do. And that one's real easy, what you should do. But maybe you don't live next door to a river. Maybe you live in a city with a population of 500,000 or more people. Well, what do you think's going to happen there if, say, the power gets cut off for more than 3 days? Are you just going to say no one told me this was going to happen? That would be a lie, because I have been telling you, and a lot of people have. Are you going to say, well, this has never happened before? Good luck. Tell that to the person that's going to kill you for your money, your food, or your daughters. Well, this has never happened before. They're not going to throw down their weapons and say, oh, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize that. It requires intelligence to extract the patterns and apply it to other situations, and honesty. So now we're creating a stack of virtues that you probably don't have. Well, maybe you have them, but most people don't have them. And of course, they're not going to react in the right way. And then finally, this is what everyone does. Pretend that there was no way of knowing and viciously attack anyone who says otherwise. We can't have that. And I would just remind you that all of those people who react in this way, which is the majority of people, they all have the right to vote, and most of them use it. And you don't need another reason to understand why things are as they are. Newsflash, things that happen every so often or every once in a great while, they still happen. A rare event is not an impossible event. But I guess modern people have lost the ability to discern between those two things. How you see these things and how you react to them is a measure of your faith. It's a measure of your intelligence, and it's a measure of honesty. And most people fail on all three measures. You will see much more of this in the times to come.